Mother Jones. Mary Harris was born in Ireland in 1830. She came to the United States when she was 5 years old. In 1861, she married George Jones, an iron worker in Memphis, Tennessee. Mr. and Mrs. Jones had 4 children, all of them boys. In 1867, tragedy struck the Jones family. An epidemic of yellow fever hit Memphis. Mr. Jones and his 4 sons caught the disease. Tragically, they all died in the same week. Mary didn't want to stay in Memphis, so she moved to Chicago. She started a sewing business, but tragedy struck again. In 1871, a great fire burned the city of Chicago. Mary lost everything she owned. Not knowing what to do, she asked a labor union for help. Through the union, Mary learned about the problems of other workers. She found out that many workers were overworked and underpaid. In 1877, she helped to organize a strike at a railroad company. It was one of the first strikes in American history. Mary continued to fight for workers' rights. People called her Mother Jones because of her white hair. She lived to be 100 years old and was very active even in her later years.
A. Philip Randolph. Asa Philip Randolph was born in Florida in 1889. In 1911, he moved to Harlem, a neighborhood in New York City where many other African Americans lived. The next year, he enrolled in the City College of New York and became politically active. At the time, the United States was at war. He spoke out against the war, and he was arrested for giving an anti-war speech in 1918. After the war, Randolph concentrated on the problems of African American workers. In those days, only certain jobs were open to African Americans. Most of these jobs were service positions. Porters, for example, served food and carried bags on trains, but they hardly made enough money to pay for their own basic needs. In 1925, Asa became president of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters. The Brotherhood was a labor union, and it negotiated better working conditions for porters. Randolph continued to fight for the rights of African American workers throughout his life. He organized many protests and marches. In 1963, he gave a famous speech at the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. He asked the nation to make good jobs available to all Americans who were willing to work hard. He called this a revolution for jobs and freedom. The following year, President Lyndon B. Johnson gave Randolph the Medal of Freedom, the nation's highest honor to an American citizen. Randolph resigned as president of the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters in 1968, and he died in 1979 at the age of 90. George Washington. George Washington was born in 1732. He was an American colonist and military officer for Britain's army in America. He served the British in a war against the French in 1754. Britain and the colonists won the war. In 1775, the colonists began their fight for independence from Great Britain. The colonists chose Washington to be the commander-in-chief. The colonies declared their independence in 1776. The Revolutionary War finally ended in 1781. Under Washington's leadership, the new American nation won the war. The American Congress chose Washington as the first President of the United States in 1789. 4 years later, he was elected again. Washington died in 1799. Today, he is known as the father of his country.
Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln was born on a farm in Kentucky. In 1816, the family moved to Indiana, and in 1830, Lincoln moved to Illinois, where he became a lawyer and a senator. Lincoln was good at giving speeches, and he spoke out against slavery. The problem of slavery had divided the country. Lincoln convinced voters he could lead them to a solution. In 1860, he was elected President of the United States. But slavery continued to divide the country. In 1861, 10 states withdrew from the Union and the Civil War started. Lincoln was re-elected in 1864 while the country was still at war with itself. In January of 1865, Lincoln added the 13th Amendment to the Constitution, ending slavery. The South surrendered on April 9th. 5 days after the war ended, Lincoln went to the theater. During the play, he was shot and killed by John Wilkes Booth. The country had lost one of its greatest leaders.
Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Franklin Delano Roosevelt was born in 1882. He grew up in Hyde Park, New York. His family was wealthy, and Franklin received an excellent education. Franklin entered politics in 1913, but in 1921 he caught polio and could no longer walk. He was determined to fight this disease. He swam regularly to get back his health. In 1928, he was strong enough to enter politics once again. In that year, he was elected governor of New York, even though he still had to use leg braces and a cane. Hard times hit the country in the 1930s. Many Americans lost their homes and their jobs. Roosevelt proposed some new ideas for overcoming the crisis, and he was elected president in 1932. He started public programs called the New Deal to help the poor and create jobs for the unemployed. FDR, as he was called, was very popular. He was re-elected in 1936 and again in 1940. World War II had started in 1939, and the United States entered the war at the end of 1941. In 1944, America and its allies were close to victory, and voters re-elected FDR for a fourth term. Sadly, FDR died in April of 1945, just a few months before the war ended.
John F. Kennedy. John F. Jack Kennedy was born in Massachusetts in 1917. He joined the U.S. Navy in 1941, right after the United States entered World War II. Kennedy was a boat commander in the Pacific Ocean. One night, his boat was bombed, and Kennedy and the crew swam to a nearby island. He towed a man who was badly burned all the way to the island. Kennedy saved his crewman's life, but his back was injured, and he had to be hospitalized. Later, he received a medal for outstanding courage, endurance, and leadership. After the war, Kennedy decided to enter politics. He was elected to the House of Representatives in 1946, and in 1952 he became a senator. Shortly after that, he had an operation on his back and had to spend a lot of time in bed. While he was resting, he wrote Profiles in Courage, a book about American senators who had followed their conscience. It won the Pulitzer Prize in 1957. In 1960, JFK was elected President of the United States. Kennedy's presidency was an exciting but sometimes dangerous time. He started the Peace Corps in 1961 to help developing countries. But a year later, he came very close to declaring war on the Soviet Union. And in 1963, Kennedy presented a civil rights bill to Congress. Unfortunately, he did not live to see his bill become law. He was shot and killed during a parade on November 22, 1963. Robert E. Lee. Robert E. Lee was born in 1807. He grew up on a farm in Virginia. In 1829, he went to the West Point Military Academy. Lee then became a lieutenant in the U.S. Army. From 1846 to 1848, Lieutenant Lee served in the war with Mexico. He continued his career in the U.S. Army until 1861. In 1861, the Civil War began, when the southern slave states separated from the United States. Lee's home state of Virginia was a slave state, but Lee was against slavery. However, he did not want to fight against his fellow Virginians. So he became a general for the Confederacy. General Lee was a brilliant leader, but in 1865 he admitted defeat and surrendered to General Ulysses S. Grant. Lee died 5 years later in 1870.
John Paul Jones. John Paul Jones was born in Scotland in 1747. He went to sea on a ship at the age of 13. At 21, he became the commander of his own ship. After several years, he immigrated to the British colonies in North America. In 1775, the colonies revolted against Great Britain. The colonists chose John Paul Jones to be the commander of the Continental Navy. Jones sailed to England in September of 1779. He fought a fierce battle with British forces in his ship Bonhomme Richard and won. His ship was badly damaged. It sank the day after the battle. The colonies won their independence from Great Britain in 1783. The Continental Navy was now the U.S. Navy. In 1788, Jones went to Europe, served in the Russian Navy for a while, and died in Paris in 1792. His body was brought back to the United States more than 100 years later in 1913 and laid to rest in a U.S. Naval cemetery in Maryland.
Jacqueline Cochran. Jacqueline Cochran was born in Pensacola, Florida. She became an orphan at an early age and grew up in poverty. Jacqueline got her first job at the age of 8, and she continued to work very hard. Eventually, she started her own cosmetics company. To advertise her business, she learned how to fly. She thought this was a good way to get people's attention. In 1932, Jackie obtained her license to fly. Jackie became more and more interested in airplanes and flying. She gave up her cosmetics business and became a full-time aviator. In 1938, she set a speed record for women flying across North America. When the United States entered World War II in 1941, Cochran was appointed director of the Women's Air Force Service Pilots. She trained women to fly warplanes across the Atlantic to the U.S. Army Air Force in Europe. She herself was the first woman to fly a bomber across the ocean. After the war, Cochran continued to break world records. In 1953, she broke the world speed record for both men and women. And in 1961, she became the first woman to fly at twice the speed of sound. Jacqueline broke more records than any other aviator. She died in 1980 at the age of 70.
William Kenzo Nakamura. William Kenzo Nakamura was born in 1921 in Seattle, Washington. His parents had immigrated to the United States from Japan before he was born. At home, he was called Kenzo, but his classmates called him Bill. Kenzo graduated from high school in 1939 and enrolled in the University of Washington to study medicine. But tragedy interrupted his studies. The United States declared war on Japan in 1941, and his mother died shortly after. 2 months later, Kenzo and the rest of his family were sent to an internment camp in Idaho. Unfortunately, the U.S. government did not trust Japanese American citizens. It sent them to internment camps as a form of imprisonment. These American citizens could not leave the camps, and they had no rights. In spite of this injustice, Kenzo decided that he wanted to serve his country. He enlisted in the U.S. Army and was shipped to Italy in 1943. On the 4th of July, 1944, his platoon came under fire. Kenzo fought bravely while his comrades moved to safety. Through his bravery, Kenzo saved his entire platoon. Unfortunately, Kenzo was shot and killed. He was laid to rest at a cemetery in Seattle. After the war, Japanese Americans held at internment camps were released. None of them had been found guilty of any crime against the United States. But it took the government some time to honor the Japanese Americans who had served in the war. In 2000, William Kenzo Nakamura finally received a Congressional Medal of Honor for his heroism during World War II.